This is going to be a discussion on GIS and career and from advice from some professionals here in locally and from abroad. So the first round is going to be introductions. Our second round will be a day in the life. The third round is going to be an advice for getting started. Round 4 will be the past, present, and future of GIS. And the last question is going to be certain student questions that were submitted and some that do come up in the chat. I ask all the students to please have yourself muted. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I will try to get them answered at the end in the last round. And so with that, let's start down the list. So as you can see here, our first on the list is Cora Chong. Full disclosure, Cora is actually a coworker of mine at CBRE in a different division. She is a GIS analyst. Cora also has a background in GIS from USC. Next is David Figueroa. David is a trained geographer, cartographer, and GIS solutions architect with many years of experience. And he works here locally in San Luis Obispo. Next is Nathan Hazelwood. He's a geospatial technology professional with over 30 years of experience in GIS across many industries and worked across many countries, including New Zealand, Scotland, England, Portugal, and Germany, along with South Africa and Singapore. Next on the list is Dario Moreno. Dario is the GIS specialist at Caltrans District 5. He has a background in civil engineering technology and has been working with GIS for over 20 years. Next is Joshua Sargent, is a environmental scientist who embraced GIS early on in his career with a background in environmental science and management from Rhode Island, and then is now currently a PhD candidate. And next is Jacqueline Telekite. She's a GIS program manager at SWCA, who's had a very long career and has started off at NASA, working as a consultant afterwards, and then eventually settled in at the SWCA. So with my introduction with them, I'd like to hand it off to the panelists to kind of give a more detailed introduction about themselves and answer the first question is how and why did you get into GIS? Let's go down the list. Cora, would you like to lead us?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Cora. As Sigfrido said, I work with him, and I work in our department called Location Intelligence. My background, I actually started out studying environmental science at the UC Irvine. That's what I graduated with. I was really interested in conservation. After that, I actually went to, I got my master's degree at USC in Geographic Information Science and Technology. And I was also working at a office of real estate investment management office as well. So that's how I kind of got into real estate, and I thought it was really cool. I was really into urban planning. So I think this job really helps me like figure out, helps me like merge all my interests together. So yeah. And I guess a little tidbit before that, I actually was really interested in biology. So I worked in a lab for a long time as well. So pretty varied background, but I'm in GIS now and pretty much here to stay.
Great, thank you. David, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I am pretty old, meaning I've been in GIS since the 80s. So I come from the age of dinosaurs in GIS. So at the time you couldn't study GIS in college. I did a geography program at UCLA, but you could start to read some literature that was starting to talk about it. And so in a cartography course I took, I studied 2 firms who were starting to apply and develop GIS. And one of them was Environmental Systems Research Institute, which hardly anybody knows today as the name of ESRI. That's what they originally were called. So I worked there for a while, and they actually are in the town that I grew up in, Redlands, California. And it took many, many years of both being at ESRI and then starting to see the world before I decided to realize that I was in a career of GIS. So let's say moving very quickly, I was working with sort of a core development group at Esri for a while. Wanted to travel. I got to Sweden and I started working with what was then the, you can call it the National Forest Survey of Sweden. I don't want to call them the United States Forest Service because they actually did forestry operations, but they were the ones that did the forestry operations on the state-owned forests. And the group I was in, as much as we were interested in the inventory projects, also wanted to maintain a good relationship with Esri because we liked the broader opportunities with GIS. So we actually became Esri Sweden. And I'm going to start to wind this down by saying that my career has been long and varied. I've worked both on the private side and the public side. I've worked for many, many years as a technician, and probably more during the 2000s, I've moved more over into transportation, particularly transit and active transportation planning. Doing some really interesting projects with pedestrian and transit wayfinding systems, as well as just straight up transit cartography in places like London and New York City, and right now with LA Metro in Los Angeles. And we even do work here in San Luis Obispo for SLOCOG. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Nathan, please give us your introduction.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hazelwood, and I am the GIS consultancy practice lead at Eagle Technology, and I'm calling you from Auckland, New Zealand. A bit far away from California, but I love it in California. I've been there many times to San Diego to the Esri user conference, and I'm a surfer. That's me in the background there. So I love it in California, and was meant to be in San Diego this year, but unfortunately with the pandemic, everything got cancelled. So hopefully next year maybe. Be looking forward to coming back again. In terms of my career, I started out at the New Zealand equivalent of your USGS, basically doing data capture work, and then went to the UK and was mainly working for the British Ministry of Defence over there for 10 years. And then coming back to New Zealand, I work for a consultancy, which is interesting because I get to work in a lot of different industry sectors. So on any given week, I can be working with utilities clients or environmental clients or agriculture clients, defence, education or not-for-profit organisations. So it's really varied career that I've had, and also particularly when I was in the UK and with the British Ministry of Defence, I got sent around to a lot of other countries, a lot of time in Germany and places like that. So that's one interesting thing, I guess, about my career is it's taken me around the world, and I've got to travel to a lot of places. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you. Dario.
My name is Dario Moreno. I'm currently the GIS coordinator for District 5 here in San Luis Obispo for Caltrans. Prior to me coming here, I've been with Caltrans for over 20 years. And prior to my assignment here, I was in the Sacramento headquarters office. And my career started on the engineering side of the fence. And how I came into GIS was early in my career. Somebody walked in the office, and I was working for pavement management at the time. And somebody walked in with a box of ArcView 2.0 and said, "Who wants to play with the software?" Right? Yeah. Right, David? And of course, I raised my hand. I go, "Yeah, I'll give it a try." And from that moment on, I kind of fell in love with the technology and started using it and applying it to a lot of our pavement, distresses. And it obviously the software's changed a lot since then, but at one point then I decided to switch careers, and I'm currently I'm a research data specialist too for the department. So I kind of abandoned the engineering side, broke my dad's heart because he's a structural engineer. But why I stay in this? Because I love it. It's the coolest technology ever. And, you know, I'm look forward to seeing what's next in this world of GIS that we live in.
Thank you. Joshua.
My name is Joshua Sargent. I'm currently a PhD student or candidate at the University of Hokkaido. My studies are involving coastal flooding hazards and looking at how to model coastal flooding hazards. I got an introduction to GIS through my studies both as a bachelor's and master's at the University of Rhode Island. And I took too many of the GIS classes to actually get the certificate because I took them between the two different degrees and I couldn't kind of carry them over. But I have since kind of grown in my GIS career through internships at USDA. Prior to coming to New Zealand, which is where I am, I'm in Hamilton, New Zealand. I was working as a GIS specialist for the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And then I moved to New Zealand. I started doing some agricultural GIS consulting, and then progressed into this PhD research.
Thank you. And Jacqueline?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Jacqueline Telekite. I first got into, I'm from San Jose originally, and then I first got into GIS right out of high school because I heard an announcement over the loudspeaker that said, if you're interested in any sort of earth or environmental science, talk to the career development people about an internship at NASA. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I want to do that. So I went to talk to them, and that was my first introduction to GIS. I started at NASA as an intern and looking at really trying to show that their satellite imagery can be used for something valuable. So it was like really remote sensing focused, but it also introduced me to ArcGIS. And I think it was ArcView at that point. But after that, got into Cal Poly in earth science and started pursuing that. And as I was there, I was an intern for SLO County doing GIS for the Public Works Department, and realized that although I really like GIS, my true passion is using GIS for environmental work. So then I moved once I graduated, I got a job at a small environmental consulting company and in Paso, and started growing their GIS department, and it was just me. And then I ended up hiring a couple more people and really like trying to change their program into something that I was envisioning, which was really, really fun. And I did that for 8-9 years, and then made a big leap just last year, a year and a half ago-ish, where I moved to SWCA, which is 1,000 people and crosses the nation, and became the program manager there, which it's me and another person. And there's about 55 GIS people. And it's a totally different world, and I'm really, really enjoying myself.
Now for this next round, the question is, what is a typical day like, and how do you use GIS in your work? David, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Sigfrido. Right now, a typical day is that I check in with we only have about 5 staff right now working with us. And each day we're working out priorities, which we kind of know pretty well, but we always need to check in because we're probably working on 3 or 4 simultaneous projects. And I'd say all of those projects are using GIS in one way, shape, or form. Our projects with LA Metro are primarily cartographic projects, but fortunately, they've allowed us, and which is one of the reasons we were attracted to that job, to help them redesign their transit information. So they did have quite a mature product lineup, if you will, that greeted people on the internet, at the stations, and at bus stops with information about their local area, about their connections, and so forth. But we've been able to help them develop that further into brand new transit maps. And hopefully we're going to soon get the nod to redo their Go Metro map, which is their jewel, if you will. It's their transit map that gets broadcast across the planet. So I'm really looking forward to that. But we have probably 3 or 4 sub-projects just with them that we're managing on a day-to-day basis. So if I'm lucky, part of that work is to go in and be strategic on how we can use GIS to further their information design, and to look into ways that we can project that across all their channels, which means not just their printed materials, but also on the web. A typical day also at this point in time means working with SLOCOG on their first ever active transportation plan. And there we are using more graphic skills as well as helping them a little bit with their mapping standards. But the job isn't what I would call straight up and down GIS. It is very much planning and transportation related. And we hope to help them more with their mapping as we move on. But it was the job that they offered us, and we were quite interested in that because we do work a lot with active transportation projects right now. So right now, that's what we do. I will say we do have a couple of, I guess you'd call them stealth projects, or projects in the background. And one is a developing collaboration we have with journalists to try to get more and better mapping, particularly data visualizations, into their articles. And we're looking more at what we call long news cycles. So we aren't looking at the short term, where did this crash happen, or whatever that might be. We're looking at more long-term trends where we can actually apply more data principles. And so that's a really exciting area. And it's one where we're using the Esri story maps. But that's a really interesting tool to be applying to some of these journalistic interests, as well as some other open source projects that we have going, which I won't go into right now because I think I'm using up my time. Thanks.
No worries. That's really interesting. Yeah, let's see. Nathan, would you like to go next?
Sure. So in some ways, unfortunately, now I'm at management level, so I don't get to do as much of the cool stuff anymore. So my typical day does involve a lot of meetings and planning and writing reports and monitoring budgets and all of that kind of thing. But I also do a lot of talking to our clients and finding out what they need, and planning. My recent background was in project management, so I did a lot of working with clients to work out what they needed, whether it was things that could do with out-of-the-box software, or whether they needed a coding project or an integration with other systems, things like that. So although I don't get to do the cool stuff with GIS anymore, one thing that's really important in my kind of role is that I need to have that background in GIS, and I need to have kind of done my time with doing data capture and cartography and all of those things, because I still use those concepts all the time, and I still need to know all of that stuff. So I do parts of my job are very interesting, particularly, I think, as I mentioned before, the sort of variety of work which I get to do. Some of the recent examples which are fairly interesting. Unfortunately, in New Zealand, we have a lot of natural disasters and things like that, like you do in California. We're on a fault line as well, so we have had some big earthquakes. We have floods and forest fires and all of those things going on here as well. And some of my colleagues have actually just been doing a lot of work on our coronavirus response, and working with all of our emergency services and health agencies here which has been pretty successful in New Zealand. We don't actually have any COVID in New Zealand at the moment. So, and that's, GIS has certainly been a contributor to what we've been doing there.
Thank you, Nathan. Again, that's another great example of how years of experience and you still need the basics even when you move on to understand those concepts are really important as you move on and progress in your career. Dario.
My day is pretty busy, and as the coordinator, one of my primary roles is GIS support. We have a lot of GIS users in our district, and from engineers, planners, we have a couple of GIS people in District 5. We have, I think, 3 right now. So part of my job is to support some of the tools that we've developed that a lot of our engineers are using. So, we have a lot of Python scripting that has to be kept up, a lot of the data that has to be, maintained, things like that. But I do a lot of training at times. And right now through WebEx seems to be a lot easier, like this meeting, right? Everybody seems to want to learn and do so. The other portion of my job includes a lot of the spatial analysis. I've been doing a lot of analysis for our active transportation plan, identifying our needs and the gaps, barriers, things like that. What projects are being done where those needs exist, and can we incorporate those needs into an existing project? So that's been a big part of my daily routine right now. Then the other component of that is producing web applications, and one of them is a active transportation assessment tool, which is showing the results of my analysis through a web app and then also a dashboard. So the web development part is big for us. And then I have to maintain the enterprise GIS database for District 5, which is another piece of, things like that. And then, we have a lot of asset management that's being done in Caltrans, not only District 5, but the entire state. So GIS plays a big part of that. And I'm developing a lot of the mobile, solutions for engineers to go out and collect signs and things like that. So pretty busy, for the most part. And I think I'm lucky as far as, I get to do a lot of different things in GIS, because not all GIS is created equal, right? So, but the analysis piece is one of my favorite things to do. And then the application development is also what's taking up a lot of my time right now.
Thank you, Dario. That's a good example of how GIS, you wear a lot of hats you can do because you have a lot of skills sometimes, and also thinking forward with the web applications and moving everything to the cloud. Thank you. Jacqueline?
Yeah. I want to first say what a typical team member of mine does, because it's very different from what I do, but that's how I started. And so basically for environmental consulting, we have different utility projects or and basically mitigation projects. Typically somebody who wants to build something somewhere, and we have to go out and say, oh, no, there's a wetland or a cultural resource or a sensitive plant or something like that. So the GIS people, make sure that the team that goes out to do those surveys have all of the appropriate forms set up on their tablets. They're very customizable. I mean, we have to change them all the time. It's like not very easy to have a template for everything, because there's so many different regulations in different states and different counties everywhere. So you have to collect different information when you're out there. So once they collect that information, then the GIS person will process that and usually make a map to go into a report, and also produce web applications, dashboards, anything, so that we can have subject matter experts actually reviewing the data and QCing it and making sure that it's really tight, because we have to submit it to agencies, and we just want to make sure it's accurate. So a typical day for me today, I was on an interview panel for a big utility contract, convincing them that our GIS team is the best. And then I had a meeting right after that to speak to my team about making sure that we have all of the appropriate skill sets outlined for our GIS team. So we were going to develop a little survey to say, like, where would you rank your skills on this versus this, so that we can make sure that everybody has the appropriate trainings available to them, because we really want to just support everybody to do their best work. And then I'm also developing a transition plan to move everything from ArcGIS Online to Portal, including all of our users and content. So that's a big thing on my to-do list. I'm also constantly talking to stakeholders, whether it's project managers or field staff, saying, like, how can we make your life easier? We really want to give you the best tools that you can have to do your job successfully. And then one of my favorite things to do is to dip into some of the big projects and say, like, okay, what cool new thing can we make for you to make sure that, you know, everything's really tight and accurate, and we can do things the best way and the fastest way possible. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you. Yeah, another great example how you start off in some field work sometime in GIS, and you're doing some data collection, and then you bring it in, you start manipulating the data on the computer.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if I didn't have that experience, I would not know how to support any of my team members to do that successfully.
Thank you. Joshua?
So in terms of a PhD student, I haven't really been using GIS too much on a daily basis. I've been primarily using a different software for hydrodynamic modeling called Delft 3D, which is kind of it draws upon some of the concepts of GIS, but I don't know if I would really classify it as a GIS software. But with a GIS background, I have been kind of helpful in terms of the other students in my office that don't have a GIS background. They have more of a traditional engineering background. So if they do have any questions on geospatial related things, I'm kind of helpful in that aspect. In terms of the consulting, then I'm kind of the agricultural consulting on the side. I've been doing my best to kind of automate all of that, or kind of make it more of a semi-automated process that processes the drone imagery that's sent to me, and then producing data products as requested. And that's something that I had only really learned how to do this year, as it was a need.
Thank you. And it's good that GIS is paying off in your program, and you're able to help others. And Cora.
So I guess for a little bit of background on how my team gets requests is, or how my team works is, we've got like maybe, I think our team is like 100 members strong, and we have people in all different regions, and we also have people who we have like a data team that kind of supports us. We have like engineers that like work, or a couple of engineers that help us on the back end for some things. And then we have like enterprise, so like really, really big projects. So where I sit in that is that I'm kind of like, I do mostly enterprise projects. So any like national project that comes in, I'll probably help out with that. I also do a lot of R&D. So my typical day is in the morning, I start off by checking first I start off with making my list of things to do, because it helps keep me on track, because it's really easy to just get off track because there's so much stuff to do every day. I check emails for requests that come in. People usually submit like a request, and it comes through like a queue, and we like just answer those requests. And I answer a lot of questions about GIS from the field, or questions from our clients, all sorts of people. Just a lot of it is like, can you do this, or are you able to do that? Can we talk about these what if we do this and that? So there's a lot of questions that come in that I have to answer. I also am a mentor for my team. So I answer a lot of like technical questions about GIS to more junior members of our team. And I answer a lot of questions about data as well, because we work with the data so much, people just come to us for a lot of data questions. And a lot of meetings every day. I think around 4 or 5 meetings every day. These can be client meetings where we're pitching to clients, chatting with clients, just servicing them in general, just getting them what they need. It could be team meetings, training meetings, anything and everything, just a lot of meetings every day. And then after the meetings or between meetings, I will work on my project-specific work. Typically, we have about 5 to 6 projects at a time, and smaller projects at a time, and then 3 to 4 larger initiatives at a time. And when I can, I try to squeeze in time for like research and development. So I read a lot of papers that come from universities. I make models, test out new methodologies. I have like a whole laundry list of just stuff that I want to research and maybe put into practice. For some reason, I started a lot of my Python projects on Fridays. I think Friday's just a great day to go to code. Our work is really fast paced, and my team works on probably several thousand projects a quarter. And it ranges from basic like static cartography to site selections for, say, like headquarters or a new office. COVID has been a big question for a lot of us. So we've worked on a lot of COVID-related projects like migration and stuff. And we also do a lot of work on retail. So like we help roll out retail stores and help them pick out which facilities and like warehouses and their stores, and try to like just a lot of site selection stuff and a lot of upkeep as well. So yeah, it's a very busy lifestyle.
Yeah, it sounds like a very busy day, and you get a lot done though, and you cover a lot of ground, especially with still reading all the papers from GIS and trying to integrate them into your work, see how future technologies can be integrated. And so that wraps up round 2. And so with round 3, in this particular round, we're going to be focusing on advice for someone getting started. And so there's 2 questions for this particular round. In your line of work, which GIS skills are the most utilized? And in addition to GIS, what other skills are important for a professional getting started? And Joshua, would you like to lead us off on this one?
So in terms of skills that I would say that are important to me, I had an introduction to Python and R as programming. So that's where I first started, and now I'm learning MATLAB. But I don't know how well that plays well with GIS, but I know that it plays well with other modeling software. In terms of maybe skills that are outside of a traditional GIS perspective, is the ability to explain highly technical information to potentially non-technical people. These could be supervisors, these could be the public. So in my role before becoming a PhD student, I was in an office of customer and technical assistance, and I was the only GIS person in my office, not the only person for the department, but I was required to kind of communicate a lot of GIS concepts to people who didn't have any kind of scope of GIS, to be able to tell them what it can do, what it can't do, and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Jacqueline?
I would say in your line of work, which GIS skills are most utilized, good cartography, aesthetics are incredibly important. Anybody can throw together a map in ArcMap or ArcPro, but if it's not pretty, then there's just going to be a million edits and nobody's going to be happy at the end. And then I would also say that web and mobile is a really big ask in consulting, and it's only going to get more so. But not necessarily at automation. There is some, we do use some automation, but since our projects are pretty fleeting and we don't do a lot of repetitive tasks, and every project is different, automation is not as like prevalent in my line of work as you would expect in other lines of work. And then I would say, to kind of echo what Josh was saying, communication is the most important thing, and a good attention to detail, but just reaching out to people if you have questions and not being afraid of people that may not be a GIS person, but being able to communicate GIS and saying like, this is how we can help you. How can you help us? Like, tell us the context of what you're trying to accomplish so that we can perform as best we can so that we are of use to you. Like thinking of it as like a service to the people that you're working with as a part of it, as, you know, one part of a team, I think is incredibly important. We can't just like take a ticket, work in a silo, and then move on with our lives. It really needs to be a collaborative effort.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't muted there, so I don't need to take that step. I probably am going to reiterate a little bit what Jacqueline said there. I work with professional level cartography and have for quite some time, so I've had a lot of appreciation for it and gone through all the frustrations and jubilation that GIS offers there, because you always want it to do more. And in that, we've learned an important lesson, probably late in my career, but I'm glad I've learned that, is that we've brought graphic designers actually into our team, because GIS people are wonderful and they're skilled and they're good with data and they know how to make maps. They know a ton of stuff, but a lot of them aren't graphic designers. And I've learned to value what graphic designers can bring to presentation and visualization. And so now I'd say that half our team are graphic designers, and we teach them the mapping that they need to know. And then we've got the GIS competence to put out the data in the right format and impress upon them that you can bend and tweak things, see so much, but make it look good. And they're good at it. They're really good at it. And so that means that you, again, can't automate everything. Or if you can, you're super good and you should be out there pushing that onto the marketplace. But my experience says that this graphic design element, if you just are hitting your head on the wall with cartography, go find some good graphic designers, teach them what they need to know about mapping and so forth. I also remember once upon a time that and there's a lot of programming, as we've heard, in that you can get into with GIS as well. And sometimes it's good. And I'm encouraging the geographers and the GIS people, if they really like that technical end, to get as good as they can. But on the other side, if you are putting together projects where you need a bit more than scripting, get some programmers, and again, teach them what they need to know about the geographic principles, about spatial data and so forth, and teach them. So embrace those skills that are out there and bring them into GIS. And above all, for the GIS people, really hone your communication skills, because if you've understood this as an integrative principle where you're essentially taking bits and bytes and making information about it, you've already understood how you need to tell stories. And I'd say that storytelling is more and more important today as GIS is asked to do even more and more. And so take things to people and say, does this make sense? Do you know what this is? And if they say no, work on it. Ask them what they're doing and try to explain what you're trying to get out of it and see what they need in order to get that story out of it. So I'll stop there, emphasize the communication, and embrace these other skill sets.
Thank you so much for that, David. Cora?
Yeah, I think a lot of us can really relate to GIS being like a very multifaceted. We have to have a lot of skills. We know what we have. We are pretty talented in that we know a lot of how to do a lot of different things. You know, we know a little bit. We know cartography. We know analysis. We know some programming, database management, or graphic design. So we definitely have to wear a lot of hats. And so from what I've observed, like WebGIS, definitely a really big one. It's just that you can serve like maps like over the internet and just access them from the browser, even if you're halfway across the world, and be able to talk on the same page is just really important. And I would echo again, graphic design and cartography. Arc Pro gives some really good options for making your maps look a lot prettier now, more so than ArcMap before. But definitely we still finish off a lot of static maps in Illustrator and Adobe Illustrator, sometimes Photoshop if we really need to, just because it's like they actually built in some extensions that like really help with finishing off maps in a graphics program. And again, like database management. So it's really important to know how to query things. Definitely like the analysis part, depends on what industry you go into. They're just, Esri just has so many different tools for different industries, and it's just really fun to learn how to use all of them. So data visualization and data processing. So for data visualization, Esri has like a lot of tools for that on ArcGIS Online, like dashboards and whatnot. You've probably seen the COVID-19 dashboard that was built on Esri's platform. So it's a really great way to just communicate information with people, and data processing with either using like encoding or using programs like Alteryx. And especially if you're doing more R&D type stuff, you'll want to know how to handle like large data sets and fundamentally just like knowing what you're doing with the data and how to analyze it. Other skills, I'd like to echo the other speakers, as soft skills is really, really important, and being able to explain really hard concepts and really hard data sets. And explain what you did in a very user-friendly manner. And in particular for my job, I have to often be present at like pitches and try to win business over. So I have to like present the data in a way that, and like our services in a way that, you know, really shows the value of our work. So really sometimes knowing how to sell your team's work is pretty important as well. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Cora. Dario.
Yeah, I think, Cora mentioned a little bit about database management. And for me, that's one of the biggest, skills that I think somebody coming out of school needs to understand and have, because if the data you're using in GIS is not good data, then you're not going to have a good product. One of the biggest challenges we face is, when somebody gives us information, whether it's a spreadsheet or Access, usually it's in a spreadsheet format, right? They're saying, yeah, I have a database, right? And they give you the spreadsheet and it's like, okay, this is not a database. So taking that information and migrating it to a format that GIS can use sometimes can be challenging, right? And when we look for an intern, one of the biggest things I look for is, do you understand database management, right? Do you understand different types of database, SQL, Oracle, Access, all those different things. So, do you understand what is a domain? That's one of the biggest questions we ask in an interview. What's a domain? And you'd be surprised how many people don't know what a domain is, in GIS, so basic, GIS, database management skills, things like that are really important. I think coming out of school that you have a good foundation and understanding to be successful.
Thank you so much, Dario. Nathan.
So I think I'm nearly last, which all the other speakers have given such good answers. There's not much more to add, so I'll try and keep it short. But a couple of tips maybe around the communication side of things to start with. If communication is a skill that you want to develop, then maybe look at organisations like Toastmasters International. That's a really good organisation if you're not that confident in speaking to people. They run some really good courses and it's really good practice. Another thing that you can look to do, another set of skills, which again uses your communication skills, is business analysis, which you can look up courses or you can look up things online about. That's a whole different discipline to GIS, but it's one that you can use to advance your communication skills. And business analysis actually leads into project management. And project management is quite often a method of getting up to management levels. If you can run some projects and prove that you can be successful in managing a team and figuring out what needs to be done, then that's your ticket to rapidly moving up the levels in whichever organisation you move into. So there's some things to think about. One really important thing I think is a lot of the study, which I know probably all of the senior people here, we all started out learning desktop GIS, right? And that's still there and it's still important, but you need to be looking at things like ArcGIS Online and mobile apps and things like that as well. And a lot of the projects that I actually work on to do with integrating GIS with other systems, whether they're financial systems or logistics systems or analysis systems and things like that, and either feeding data into those systems or getting it back. And so understanding things around systems integration is really important. Another really critical skill that you want to try and develop is complex problem solving. So sort of picking up on some of the points that Dario was making around data quality and data cleanliness and managing data. If somebody comes to you with a problem and you need to work out how to fix that problem, the first thing that you need to do is look around for the data that you're going to need. And in the real world, quite often we don't have perfect data. And unless you want to pay a lot of money to go and pay for surveyors or somebody to go and get you the perfect data, but most organizations don't. So quite often you're going to have to understand which is the best data set that I can get for how much money I've got, and what are the risks around that data if we use it, or how can we improve the data, how can we format it better, a whole lot of things like that. So that's really a key skill in the real world, and it's one that I don't know about the United States, but in New Zealand, certainly our universities don't train that very well. So maybe that's something to think about as well.
Thank you very much for that. In this next round, it's the topic is the past, present, and future of GIS, and we have two questions here. And the first is, how has your use of GIS changed since you started your career? And the follow-up is, where do you see the technology and skills heading? Nathan, would you like to lead us off?
Sure, thanks. So I think we've already touched on a lot of the points about some of the things which have been happening with the technology. One point that I think is really important is that GIS, or the geospatial industry, is a really broad industry, and it serves a whole lot of other industries. So, when we're talking about GIS, it's not just desktop GIS, it's the Internet of Things with all of the sensors that you can have, and it's all of the mobile phones which have got transponders in them, and Google and so on are capturing your location all the time if you got the tracking turned on, and so there's all of those things at one end of the scale, and then at the other end of the scale, there's charities working in Africa that are doing things to improve the lives of the people there. So got this massive group of industries that we're serving, and all of these different types of technology. The core components or the concepts behind all of those things is exactly what you're learning at the college. But you have some choices about which direction you want to go in. And there are technical avenues that are developing, and things like big data, so huge, vast data sets that we're having to deal with from collecting all of these transponder signals and things like that. That's one avenue that you could go down. Or working with 3D animations and things like that, another avenue. But some of the things which are really important probably, and the best chances for getting jobs, is to look at the industries in the area that you want to live. And the telecommunications sector is a big growth sector at the moment. One of the things with COVID, of course, is everybody wants fast internet. So there's a lot of work happening with rolling out fiber networks in places like the United States at the moment. So depending on what it is that you want to do, you've got a whole lot of choices. Another really important choice could be, do you want to be sitting behind a desk all day, or do you actually want to spend some time out in the field, working with a GPS and collecting some data about something? Some of those jobs might not pay you as much money, but if you enjoy being outside and doing things in the countryside, or protecting endangered species, that kind of thing, then maybe you need to work out what your trade-offs are with respect to that. I'll leave it at
that. Thank you, Nathan. Jacqueline?
So GIS for environmental consulting, when I started, it was a piece of paper that you went out and filled out your coordinates where you were and what you saw, and then we would bring that back to the office, and the data person would type in things into an Excel sheet or an Access database. And then for like really intense surveys, we would do Trimble's, which took forever because Trimble's are clunky and your arm gets tired holding them. But now we're like all on the mobile tablet situation. So that would be the biggest change. But I think what Nathan said in the last question, the system integration thing is going to be so huge in the future, and is already taking off because there's so many solutions out there. Like if you have like I want to keep track of remediation sites and their progress on them, it's like, there's this other software solution. It's like, how do you connect that to GIS? GIS can do a lot, but all of these other programs can do just like, this is like specialized for exactly what you need. So it's like, how do you manage the data in that system, but also in GIS? That's going to be a really big thing. And then I think as we're getting these tablets set up and putting all this data into them, I think what I think Dario and Nathan both said this is that the data quality is going to be like, it's already an issue, and it's going to be an even bigger issue because we're collecting so much more data now that you need to put really strict quality assurance on your data so that you aren't spending the rest of your life doing quality control. And so that's like the topology or the attribute rules or the conditional forms, anything like that. That's like really blowing up just as mobile solutions are coming out more and more.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Dario?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jacqueline 100%. And when I started, using GIS, it was a planning tool and then pavement management. We're like, hey, what can we use it for, right? And it was not basic, but it wasn't as powerful as it is today. So over the course of my career, I've seen, ArcView, and then I went to, different versions, right? Now we're looking into Pro, and now we're looking into all the mobile solutions that are out there. And for Caltrans, we're finding that it's applicable in many different functions, right? Our surveyors are using it, our planners are using it, environmental is using it, our engineers and pavement management are using it. So now for us, the goal is how to integrate all these different functions in Caltrans so everybody can talk to each other, in the same way, right? And then data quality control is a big issue, right? People are publishing services. How do we keep 5 different people from publishing the same information 5 different ways, 5 different times, 5 different sources, right? So all that, as we get bigger in using GIS, we need to be able to manage and sustain all that. So for us, it's really a sustainability piece, right? We need to hire more GIS people. That's one of the things that I think Caltrans is struggling with right now, because we're such a engineering heavy entity that sometimes we forget that, you can do GIS, but we need qualified people to run the GIS systems that have to support all these different GIS functions, right? So for me, the future of GIS is great, but we need to be able to invest in the infrastructure, the GIS professionals that are coming out of school. And I'm really excited about that piece, because when I started GIS, like David said, we didn't have, GIS degrees. And so right now that I'm seeing all the new kids coming out with GIS degrees, and it's a really good thing for GIS's future.
Thank you very much, Dario. Joshua?
So I would say that in terms of changing in my own career, GIS kind of was an expectation of a environmental scientist as a skill set, but it was taught separate from computer science and taught separate from the database management kind of component. So I guess in the change of my career, it's been the learning the other side of GIS. So I would say for skills in the future, just like, again, many of the speakers have been saying that the progression to online and digital products, however, there's still going to be some slow adoption of that. I know that in state and federal government, they still prefer a bunch of paper maps and paper data products. So just being able to kind of do both of those things, as well as the slow adoption of Pro, just kind of the slow transition of the different softwares as it grows.
Thank you, Joshua. Cora?
Yeah, so I started working at my company maybe 3 years ago, and it's already drastically changed from like when I started. We were doing a lot of paper maps. Just people were asking for logos on maps, and that's the bane of my life. But now it's like way more interactive maps. We've transitioned from ArcMap, and people were using Map Info to fully ArcPro now, and ArcPro supports like web GIS much better. It's like a much smoother like upload process. So now it's all about like online and mobile, as others have said as well. And I've seen how much more like data has become available recently, and a lot of it is like figuring out what to do with this, like with all this new information that we have, and how to like use the tools that we already were provided with to figure out, to glean new insights from these new data sets. And Nathan has mentioned before the mobile data. I think it's just fundamentally changed retail. It's it's fundamentally changed retail site selection, because now with mobile data, basically the location data we can get from cell phones, we now know more about how people shop, when people shop, why people shop. We can know a lot about our customer, and it was surprising. Like, a lot of retailers don't actually know as much about the customer, like their preferences and stuff like that as we thought. So using like mobile data in a thoughtful way, so nothing like privacy intruding or anything, just like being able to use mobile data to just help us figure out what kind of people our customers are, really has changed how we use location data. So, and I see in the future more and more of these kinds of data sets, like very large data sets, becoming more and more popular.
Thank you, Cora. And David.
Yeah, thank you. I just have to emphasize again how old I am. I remember one time getting my hands on the first ever PC that was used in GIS in Sweden. I spent a long time doing GIS in Sweden. It had 25 megabytes of storage space, and we thought that was awesome, just so you know. Today, of course, that's different, but if you get into GIS, you just get used to everything changing quickly and often, and count on that happening. And so, as Cora was mentioning about these data sets, that a lot of GIS professionals really don't know how to use very well yet. And I think there are loads of data quality issues around them. These mobile data sets that you can get from AT&T, from Verizon, from other sources, that's a huge area, I think, of inspection and, of course, of opportunity that we need to learn about. It's fascinating. I'd like to know what Cora's learning, but the issue's flipped a bit, is that there's so much data out there now, you have to ask some serious questions about it. And so the principles you're learning in GIS programs are incredibly valid, even if you're not studying that level of data yet, but checking out its geography, its if it's what it says it is, why it's being created, because a lot of times we used to run into issues with data trying to be used for the wrong reasons. And that's really important to understand. Why was this data created? What did the originator want out of it? And it means that it probably can be used for this and a few other things. And if you're lucky, maybe even more than that. But don't try to use something that fundamentally wasn't intended to be used in a way that you might want to use it for. Integration, that's there, and I think Nathan mentioned the importance of that, so I won't harp on that, but learn a lot about APIs, what that means for your projects. If you're not used to them, learn about them, and these are the way that fundamentally that these pieces of technology and data sources can speak with each other. They're really important, and more of them can also pass coordinates in geography right now. So that's all good stuff. And then mapping, I think you can't get very far in GIS unless you really understand the basics of mapping, and hopefully learn a lot more about how to tell with the least amount of information you need the story that you want to tell, because that's what mapping is all about. It's really powerful, but you can get it wrong. And so learn what makes it right and get good at that. And I'd say above all, find some part of GIS in the vast world of GIS that you think is really, really fun. Some people like data integration. They can die with integration going on, and they love that. I think it's cool. I learn about as much as I think I need to know to carry on the dialogue with staff who really need to know how to make that work. But I like watching the world change regarding equality and not having so many cars on the road. And so everybody has an opportunity to get to places on their bike, on a bus or a train, or can walk to where they need to go. So I'm spending a lot of time right now, hopefully helping to change some of the environments that we live in, primarily urban environments, so that they're easier to get through, a lot safer than they have been, and more fun to be in. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for that, David. And now we're at our final round, student questions. And so for this particular round, these questions are open-ended, so feel free to chime in if you'd like to answer. These are some of the questions that the students submitted that didn't make it into the other rounds. So, and this is for my students as well and our guests. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them in this last round. And now with that, the first question for this round robin is, what would be your tip for someone looking for a job using GIS? What makes a resume or portfolio stand out?
So a few things that I look for with resumes is, what tools did you use to do something, whether that's some work experience that you've got or some of your university assignments or projects. What challenges were there that you had to overcome, whether that's messy data or dealing with people or something like that, vague requirements, something like that. But also, what were the outcomes? Give me some evidence. Anybody can write a resume and sort of say that they've used ArcGIS and they've used ArcGIS Online. Well, that's great, but what for? And what did you do with it? And what were the outcomes that you were trying to achieve? So really think about sort of the evidence, the proof of what you've done. That's what I always look for in a resume. And just with regards to getting a job and things like that, one thing that I'd suggest for new people, if you're going for your first interview, it can be quite, when you're fresh out of college or whatever, it can be quite, make you very nervous. So one thing that I'd suggest is find somebody that you can practice having an interview with. If maybe if you've got a neighbour who is a manager, even they don't have to be a GIS manager or anything like that, then ask them to run through a practice interview with you a couple of days before your real interview. The more practice that you do with things like that, the better that you can get at it, and it sort of makes you less nervous if you practice it a couple of times. Maybe your parents or somebody, one of their friends. Make sure it isn't your mum or dad that's doing it, because then it's not kind of real. But if one of your parents' friends maybe is a manager or something, maybe just ask them if they'd mind practicing an interview with you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer, or should we move on?
I'll just emphasize the skill I think we mentioned earlier, but Nathan brought it up, and I'll just emphasize it, that presenting yourself and learning how to be comfortable, or at least look comfortable speaking, is really important. And a lot of times companies, if you get to an interview, you're just going to have one moment, which might be a few minutes to impress them. And so practicing can sound kind of stupid. Why do I want to practice in front of somebody? But almost always you learn something immediately that is going to help you. And I always liken it to, if you're used to playing an instrument or used to keeping some skill up that you do with sports or something, if you don't practice it, you kind of lose it. And if you don't present yourself very often, there are a few gifted people who can just on the spot present themselves no matter what. And hopefully you don't need a few beers to do that. But I'd say get used to practicing and get used to bothering your friends with, hey, just hear me out here and tell me if this was good, bad, or what I need to improve. And just one other point there are clubs, there's speaking clubs such as Toastmasters and other organizations that if you really want to get good at speaking, you can invest some time in. And they're usually very open to just hearing you on the spot without you having to become a member. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. And then the other question here is, what are your opinions on the Geographic Information Systems Professional Certification? How helpful is it for your particular industry?
I'm going to chime in on that one. So from the perspective of the GIS professionals in Rhode Island, there are several people that they got this the GISP, and then they just let it lapse because it wasn't something that was providing any component to them. Like, it wasn't providing any service to them. I believe that the perspective on that has changed some, because now some jobs are requesting GISP, and if you don't have a certificate or a GISP, then you may be kind of seen as you don't have the experience, but you could easily, as Nathan said, you could easily explain all of your experience without the kind of that kind of GISP letters after your name.
I think just to add to what Joshua said, it kind of depends on what kind of job you want to get. I think there's four ways of getting GIS experience and training and knowledge. One is through college or university, pretty obvious, and you could extend your coursework and go on to do a master's or a PhD or whatever else. Another method is experience, so just getting a job and getting work experience. The third way is to do things such as the professional certification type things, such as the GISP. And the other method is getting software specific skills. So doing some of the professional training courses through Esri or something like that. And that really depends on what kind of job you want to get. As Joshua was saying, if you want to get a job, sometimes in federal or state government, they're increasingly asking for things like GISP. But if you're looking at other types of jobs, then maybe some of those other training options might be more suitable.
Yeah, I would say that a GISP is kind of a shorthand way to say I have GIS experience and a GIS educational background, but we still want to see what your experience and your background is. So it's not like GISP is it might give you a leg up, but we thought about requiring it for some of our positions, but ended up scrubbing it anyway. So I don't think it's a deal breaker, but it is kind of a cherry on top or a shorthand way of just saying, like, here's my name and I have this experience, and you can see it right in my title because I have all these alphabet letters after it. But yeah.
All right, and we're almost out of time, so I'll just the last two questions are, and they were kind of touched upon in round 3 and 2. Is the first one is, how do you stay current on new GIS technologies to stay competitive in your field? And then the last question is, what has been your favorite project or best moment while using GIS?
To stay current, I mean, you have to, I guess GIS is kind of like the laptop that you buy and then like next year it's out of, it's not the latest and greatest or the new iPhone, right? So for me, I just try to take courses when I can. Like this week, I'm taking, the JavaScript just because we're at a point where we want to make sure that we can customize some of the web applications, and that's a need, right? So there's always something to learn in GIS, and one of my favorite projects was implementing ArcGIS for server when I worked in Sacramento for the Division of Maintenance, and that's before Caltrans was really on this web, kick of GIS, before GIS was really what it is today. So that took a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of learning. And when I was done, now to see where we're at today, it gives me a lot of, happiness to see that it was not for nothing, right? It really did end up being a good project.
Yeah, I'll just quickly chime in. Even if you don't use Esri products, although most people do, if you haven't checked out their annual conference, it's something to behold. I was out of it. I was in it for a long time, of course, and I was working with Esri and presented. I was actually the cartographic chair for a while for cartographic interest group, and then I fell out of that for a while, but then I got back into it again a few years ago, and I'm so glad I did, because there's just a lot to learn, not just from Esri, although it's really interesting to always see how they're evolving their products, because you don't have time sometimes to keep up on your own. And so it's good to have this focused few days where you can check it out, but as well to see how others, and that's always for me the most fascinating thing, is how's this being applied? How are people using it? And you do run into that. But it's neat at the conference because you, the challenge is there are about 15 different simultaneous sessions you want to be a part of, and you can't, and you have to choose. So it's great that the Video Age is here, and they've got stuff up online, and you can check it out afterwards. So that's my recommendation.